Christmas. Welcome to the weekly album anniversary recap show brought to you by CCM Twitter. No, I kid. On this show, we will look at albums we celebrated from December 18th through December 24th. I'm your host, Caleb, or Caleb the Spy on Twitter and Instagram. All right, every day on those social media sites, I do post about what I call album anniversaries, and it's just a celebration of the release date. It's the anniversary of that album's release date. I started doing this a couple years ago when I started tracking a number of my favorite releases, and I would just take that data, remember the album, celebrate the album, or listen to the album. In the last year, though, the number of albums that I have on my calendar grew significantly. And now I have every album I own tracked on my calendar, as well as a ton of suggestions. And with so many of those albums and just a limited number of characters, I don't always have a chance to say everything I want to about an album. So I started this podcast to just take that chance to talk a little more in depth about every album, not about every album, but about albums I want to go deeper into. Occasionally we'll also talk some news and just other things going on in the music industry. Not that I have this great insight into the music industry. Anyway, you know what I mean. And the joke about CCM Twitter is that, the majority of my interactions on Twitter do come from that group. So shout out to CCM Twitter. I should start putting that when I post this thing. All right, let's talk about just a little bit of news. The Lean Years tradition, which I've talked about a number of times on this show. It's by a group named Model Engine. They used to be called Black Eyed Siva. That album is now out on streaming. You should go check that album out. It is great. It's supposed to be a new mix. I haven't actually listened to it because I don't do the streaming services much, but I'm going to this week. I'm going to make sure I set aside some time to take a deeper look into the new mix here in 2023. Something else I do want to mention is I just finished reading a comic. It's like a graphic novel. It was an omnibus. So it was a collection of a bunch of releases, and it's called Hip Hop Family Tree. Really interesting. If you're interested at all in the history of hip hop and the genre of hip hop in an interesting, unique way of telling the story, Hip Hop Family Tree, you should totally check it out. A great artist, Ed Piskor, I believe is how you say his name. And it's just a super interesting look at the history of hip hop by a comic book artist that I really enjoy. A lot of local libraries would even have it if you're really interested. Those were a couple things I wanted to mention. Obviously, I've still been doing my Christmas posts leading up to the Christmas, just celebrating a bunch of different Christmas albums that I enjoy for one reason or another. And with those out of the way, after Christmas, it'll be another 11 months before we pick up the Christmas music. So I've enjoyed doing that. I've gotten some fun reactions. A couple albums people were not even aware of, and that's been fun to post those and just see people's reactions. So, all right, let's get into the album anniversaries. Only a couple. Again, this is really a dry time of the year. In June and July and August, September, I don't know how we're going to keep up, but right now it's pretty light still, so there's only two. And the first one I want to talk about is Poor Old Lou in Their Last Performance. Or maybe it's In Their Last Performance by Poor Old Lou. I don't know. It was released sometime in 1988. Breaking in and cutting off my own show, you can hear Harry Potter playing in the background because that's what my kids are listening to. This was released in 1998. I said it like 5 times. I don't think I said it right once. I'm a failure. 1998. And back to the show. So what do I mean by it was released sometime in 1998? Well, I don't know the actual release date. It's just not documented well. You get past really the year 2000. A lot of the late 90s, it's pretty easy to nail them down, and a lot of the bigger releases, it's really easy. But a lot of these Christian bands and those releases in, really before 2000, they can be pretty spotty and a little hit or miss. So this came out sometime in 1980. I couldn't figure it out. In January and February, again, we're going to have a lot of these where I just kind of picked a date and I said, all right, for this, there's not a lot of other things to talk about this day, so we're going to pick those dates. I tried to make it somewhat meaningful when I could, but a lot of times it was just impossible. So I just picked a random date, I threw it on the calendar, So yeah, I did that. And the reality is my calendar ramped up. I talked about this before. My calendar totally ramped up at the beginning of this year, about halfway through this year. So there's a lot of releases from 1998 that celebrated a big anniversary, 2003, that I just missed. I didn't get them on the calendar. I wasn't doing this many albums that early in the year, so I missed a ton. I tried to go back and track them and figure them all out, and it was way too much work. I just couldn't do it, so I ended up dropping that. And so I celebrated the ones I can, and if I'm still doing this in 5 years, we'll see if that's happening. I'll get back to them then. So then when they celebrate a larger anniversary. Okay, I made the joke about the title, but first off, the name of this album is a really bad name for an album. They call it In Their Last Performance. It wasn't their last performance. For anybody who knows the history of Poor Lou, they did break up in 1998, but then they came back and released another album in 2002. Frankly, that is my favorite album, the one they released in 2002. And they were they refined their sound a little. I don't know what it is about that album. Maybe it's a little more clean, it's a little more polished, but I really, really love that album, The Waiting Room. I've talked about Poor Lou on the show before. From a historical perspective, I've said this. I really think they feel like a moment in the CCM, especially the alt rock scene. I just feel like they were heads and tails above so many of the other bands that were coming out, because they really were around in the early 90s. And their album that they had released before this, I think in 1996, I could have that wrong, is A Picture of the Eighth Wonder. And man, that album is about perfect. And even their breakup feels like this moment. They break up they've just put out this amazing album, and then they end up breaking up. And I don't know, I'm speculating a little here based upon some of the things I've heard, but I think really Aaron Sprinkle, who was the lead guitarist and I think did most of the song composing, really wanted to be the lead of his own band, and he was starting a band called Rose Blossom Punch, which really didn't last long. I think they put out one album back in the day, and then they ended up doing one more, and then he just started doing solo work. And if you listen to, I know I've mentioned them a lot, the Church Jams Now episode, the one where they have Aaron Sprinkle on, he talks about that solo record and how that came around, and that was really interesting. A record company basically said, hey, we'll throw some money at you. We're trying to start it was a record store or a record label, but they wanted to get a name on there, and so they threw some money at him, and he did a solo project that he wasn't even really intending to do. So that was kind of the end of the band. He was moving on to other things, and obviously he's gone on to have an incredibly prolific career, but it was a real bummer. Again, I mentioned this was one of the first bands that I knew all four members of the band's name, and I don't know why that feels significant to me, but it does. It does feel significant. Them and Plank Eye are both bands that I don't remember that being important to me, that I knew their names. Anyway, all right. And again, like I said, it makes sense that Aaron wanted to move on, but to me, it's a pretty big disappointment, because again, they had put out this perfect album, and their 2002 release is even better in my opinion. It's absolutely amazing. So, neither of those two albums really have a bad song on them. All right, so that's kind of some of the history, and that's what I'm going to try and focus on. I realized that for me to talk about the musical dynamics in a lot of these albums, I've realized I'm a feel guy. I like the groove of it. I felt like the feel of the music, and I like stuff that's got a little pop sensibility, and I like stuff that's a little weird. And so I don't know what that comes from, but so I'm not going to always go real in depth on the music, just because I can't always do it. I can't talk music theory. I can't play an instrument, so I can't really go into some of those things. So I'm going to try and hit on some of the historical significance for me, at the very least. A lot of it's going to be personal. Some of it will be, actual historical significance. So let's talk about this album just a little bit. For a live album, I think it's a pretty good recording. It sounds okay. There's some moments where it doesn't sound great, probably, or it sounds a little lower quality, I think. I don't know. I'm trying to compare it to other live albums, and I feel like some of my other comparisons, like the 5 Iron Frenzy live albums, they just sound a little better, I think. But yeah, Digging Deep and Chance for Chancers are probably my two favorite songs off of this album. I'm kind of bummed they didn't end up playing Where Were All of You. That's still my favorite Poor Old Lou song. That's a song off of Sin. But they played most of their hits. They played a lot of good songs on here. And again, I mentioned the recording is fine, not great. Again, I'm no musician, but I will say that their music does feel complex and layered. That's kind of how I would describe it. And I really do think that does come through on this live record. That's, again, just my opinion. And seriously, Nick Barber, the bass player, and Jesse Sprinkle, Aaron Sprinkle's brother, They're the rhythm section, bass and drums, and they're just so good, I think. So good. Yeah, so that was in their final performance by Poor Old Lou, which again was not their final performance. Bad choice of a name, guys. We're going to be talking about two CCM albums this week that celebrated anniversaries, and the second one is Unfazed by The Waiting, which also came out in 1998, so celebrating a 25-year anniversary. I loved Blue Belly Sky. That was their first album, and for me, it's so good. It's so easy to connect with. It's so easy to listen to. It's got a little bit of quirkiness to it, but it's some good poppy songs. I really like it. And for them, I still remember, and my memory is not as good as it once was, but I swear me and a bunch of my friends went and saw them in this random middle school in the middle of Wisconsin. I'm from the Twin Cities of Minnesota, and to get to Wisconsin, it's an hour and a half drive to the east, and you're kind of in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin. Once you get across the border, and I swear we saw them at some random middle school. It was like 10 other people there plus us, and yeah, so that's my history. I did love Blue Belly Sky, but then I kind of got more into the punk rock and the ska and the alternative stuff. And the Waiting never really had another album that really jumped out to me personally. Unfazed was their second most streamed song. That's the lead song off this album. And the rest of their top 10 is from their self-titled and Blue Belly Sky. And most of them really from that self-titled instead of this album. And, I was thinking back on The Waiting, and I honestly thought they were a much bigger deal back in the day. I remember that image from their self-titled album, the guy standing in front of the moving train. I feel like that was all over, and a lot of casual CCM listeners really had that album. I was talking with people on CCM Twitter, which I'll get to kind of why I was about that. In college, I feel like I was the odd man out because I wasn't as into them anymore. I was into Five Iron Frenzy and the Insiders and Supertones and MXPX and Goaty Hook and all those kind of punk and ska bands. And I was the weird one in college that didn't like these guys and Jars of Clay and Third Day, Small Town Poets, bands like that. So when I was in my Campus Crusade group, I was the weird one for not being into bands like this. And I swear that album, that self-titled, was a big deal, but I put out some polls on CCM Twitter to kind of see, who was who do you think was bigger? Bands like the Supertones and Five Iron Frenzy or The Waiting? Were The Waiting more of a mainstream band? And it pretty unanimously came back that most people didn't see them as a mainstream band, which I think they really were. They were on Sparrow Records. I really feel like they were kind of a mainstream band. They toured with Jars of Clay. That feels pretty mainstream to me, although the W's toured with DC Talk, so who knows what's going on. And I really thought that self-titled was a big deal. It was a big album. I think Eric included it in the Smash Hits tournament from a while ago, and I really thought that was a bigger one, but a lot of people felt differently. There were a couple people who agreed with me, but a lot of the evidence was fairly anecdotal, and I just don't know how solid it was. And just getting record sales from that time frame, it's just not something that's accessible. So we kind of have to go with our feel for it. One of the things that is really interesting to me about them is that in 2010 they did a Kickstarter and it was a total failure. They did this Kickstarter and I think they had about 109 people. They raised $11,000 for another album, and they've never delivered on it to this day. It's 2023, almost 2024. They've never delivered on that. So I think that kind of any sort of fan base they had hanging on has probably moved on, because that probably bugged quite a few people. I know it would bug me if a band didn't deliver on a Kickstarter that they were going to try and do. So, and just by comparison, and I know this is a bit anecdotal, but, Five Iron Frenzy did their Kickstarter a year later and raised $200,000 with thousands of people engaging. So I don't know if it's a Kickstarter thing or just The Waiting didn't have as much life after death as a band, but it's kind of an interesting dynamic because, again, I thought they were much bigger than that, but not everybody did. There was a number of people who said they had never even heard of The Waiting. So, all right. So some quick thoughts on the album. I don't think I've ever actually listened to this album, Unfazed. Again, it's good. It's pop rock. I thought it was enjoyable. I don't think it's as good as Bluebelly Sky. And I wondered if there was kind of a early 90s REM influence potentially. I know they're both from Georgia. You know, it kind of has that sound where it's a little alternative, a little rock, but kind of a lot of that twangy. I don't want to say maybe twangy isn't the right term, but I don't know. It was fine to listen to. There wasn't a lot there that really moved me. I know a lot of people really loved them, and I did. Again, I love Bluebelly Sky. I thought that was a really good album. But outside of Unfazed, the lead track, there wasn't a whole lot here that helped my interest. I was kind of feeling pretty done with it by the end of the album. But so yeah, Unfazed by The Waiting came out in December, which I think is also very interesting, you know, just with so few releases. All right. We started last week talking about my favorites from 2023, so we're going to finish that list off. I did think of two more honorable mentions. One is Amber of Memory by Tommy Guerrero. It's just an instrumental album, and I love Tommy Guerrero. I think he's absolutely a super, super cool artist. I think he used to be a professional skateboarder, and he's released some great instrumental albums. You should go check out his work. Amber of Memory by Tommy Guerrero came out sometime in September. Really good, really enjoyable instrumental album. And then Fishbone, they were one of the great ska bands from the 80s and 90s. They put out a real small EP that I enjoyed. It probably would have landed, I kind of forgot about it, but it probably would have been right around that number 15 spot. Just 4 songs. I enjoyed it, but it didn't blow me away. So speaking of a 4-song EP that did blow me away, my number 5 album is that. It's the Dropseed EP by the Dingees. Yes, it's 4 songs, but they're all perfect. I mean, they are great. Honestly, I love every song on this album. It is really, really good, or on this EP. Really, really good. One of them was kind of a redo. They had put it out on a comp maybe about a year ago, but it's really good. There's 4 songs, and they jump. The first song's real punk rock. The 2 in the middle are kind of more ska and reggae, and then the last one's a little more punk rock. I really just like that. You know, they breeze through all these styles, and that's what I love about the Dingees. I have grown to really understand how cool the Dingees are, and it's because of that ever-changing style. Every song is unique, and they jump back and forth between those styles on albums. They're just great. And I will say it, this year was the year the Dingees finally clicked with them. I knew about them in the 90s. I had at least one of their albums, maybe 2, but I just didn't get it. I just didn't understand. I think I wanted all my ska to be more on the punk rock side, and they slowed it down a lot, and I did not get it. And this year was like an awakening for me. Again, I've had their albums for a while, but I've had all their albums. I think I only had the one Sundown to Midnight. I think I only had that one up until kind of the early 2000s, and then I went back and bought all their albums, and I've had their other ones for a while, but I really had not clicked with them. And then this year, it's about the only thing I've listened to in the car for most of the year. I've thrown a couple things in there, but I've had their CDs on rotation in the car this year, and it really was the year I fell in love with the Dingees. They have probably pushed themselves into that top 3 discussion in the Christian ska bands. You know, it's Five Iron Frenzy is my favorite, but I could make a strong argument that the Dingees are now number 2 for me, in front of the Insiders and the Supertones, and then Buck Enterprises and the W's. At some point, maybe I should release a rankings, but then I would actually have to choose. I don't know if that'd be good for anybody. Let me check some of my notes here. I've kind of gone off script. So yes, this is the year I've fallen in love with the Dingees, and so this is a bit of a sentimental pick. I'm not going to lie, But when this came out, I was super excited. They had a little listening party. I went to that, and I went to that. It was virtual. I checked that out, and yeah, I've listened to this probably every week since it came out. And even though it's 4 songs, I super love it. So yeah, I strongly encourage you, go check out the Dingies, go check out this Dropseed EP. And yeah, they're just a unique band, and I really like their voice and what they're about. So yeah, soft spot for the Christian ska bands. And I know that they wouldn't really identify as that anymore, but they're going to always have that place. 3 albums on Tooth and Nail. You're going to get lumped in with that, whether you like it or not. So, all right, let's move on to number 4. And I'm really going long. I'm already at 20 minutes. Oh boy, I'll try and speed up here. I got so many notes. All right. It is what it is. If you don't want to listen, I guess that's fine. I apologize for going longer. Number 4 is Hell Mode by Jeff Rosenstock. So anticipation for this album was super high for me. Jeff really has become a bit of a mythical figure for me in a lot of ways. He probably is my favorite active artist that's out there outside of Five Iron Frenzy. He's actually touring. He's a little more regular with albums. So I consider him a little more active. So if not including Five Iron, who's kind of active, he probably has moved into that realm. I've seen him twice? No, once. Only once in the last, when he came through. He's been through the Twin Cities only once in the last couple of years. But he's coming back in April. I probably will go see him again. I really love Jeff Rosenstock and his music. Yes, you got to be willing to sit through the cursing if that's not something you're interested in. Again, cursing doesn't really bug me that much. And his lyrics hit me. They really do. Now, this album, a little less so. No Dream really hit me. Worry really, really hit me. I really, really connect with so much of the lyrics in those songs. And yeah, so I mean, that's, I think, has been his connection. Like so many of the other bands that I really love, it is that lyrics. It is some of the attitude that he really speaks with also that really just I connect with. I love his DIY approach to music, even though that's not something that's been super important to me. It definitely is a selling point for him. If you ever want to look into how he has kind of advanced in his career for years and years and years, he never sold his albums. He would always give them away. And still to this day, that is part of his deal with his record company is I have my own website and I'm going to give away my music. If anybody wants it, they just got to go there and download it. They don't need to buy it. It is accessible. The way he used to do shirts when he was doing Bomb the Music Industry, which is a previous band of his, was he would just have like stencils and you would bring a t-shirt and he'd spray paint them on and he'd spray paint the stencil on. And that was how he did t-shirts because he was trying to keep things super cheap, super DIY. Really interesting guy in his approach to music. I really, really like it. And yeah, I this is an interesting album because Like You Better may be the most poppy, polished thing he's ever produced. Doubt is also a really, really good song. I like Head, Future is Dumb, and I Want to Be Wrong. Those are all really good songs in my opinion. And again, the second half of the album is a lot more calm and a lot more, it's not as hectic or chaotic or punk rock maybe. It's a little more calm, but it still is really, really good, really interesting. I probably am, I don't know if I like side A or side B better. Probably side A is probably what I lean towards. And, Jeff walks this line between despair and, he makes me want to fight and feel hopeful. And he does all that really, really well. It's a really interesting mix because, yeah, some of his lyrics are clearly him battling with the world around him and some of the, fighting off depressing feelings. And I can totally, feel that way. And, the album still feels raw. It feels DIY, but yet it is much more polished and his craft is much more polished. His songwriting and his song composition just continues to evolve, continues to advance. He is not an artist that seems content to just do what he's done before. And a lot of it works on this album. Some of it doesn't. I will say, his last album was a huge, huge album for me. And this one only comes in at number 4. And, that says something because he is, again, probably one of my favorite artists. There's a lyric, again, just to kind of get at some of his lyrics here. So, oh, the weight of the world makes me feel the future is gone. That is kind of how, really despairing lyrics that he throws out there. But those also hit me really, really hard sometimes. I've driven around yelling the words to Jeff Rosenstock songs as much as I have anybody outside of probably Five Iron Frenzy, just because I really do connect with his lyrics sometimes. And like I said, side B, a little more mellow, but yeah, the whole thing holds my attention. So number 4, Jeff Rosenstock's Hell Mode. Moving on to number 3, and it is Suburban Legend by Dury.
Coffee's lost its taste and the 6 o'clock train's always running late. But if I stop now, I know I'm never gonna make it back to the tragedy. Laugh like a comedy, rock in society, dial up lobotomy. 9 to 5, fantasize about the end of the day, just to wake up and do it all again. I should have known better than to think that this could change. I should have seen the brighter.
In my notes, I have Sunburn Legend by Dury, and I'm the Sunburn Legend. I don't think they are. Anyway, this was the surprise of the year for me. I don't think I had heard about this band before this year. And I think a lot of people know the story. Again, Austin is the kind of lead on this group. He's been in a couple other bands, and none of them have really hit. He's done some touring, nationwide touring. So, bands that are being successful, but hasn't really taken off, hasn't really exploded. And he moves back home during COVID. He reconnects with a sister who's, I think, 7 years younger than him, who's kind of in a different generation. She's a younger, maybe Gen Z, or at least a younger millennial, and he's kind of an older millennial. And they connect. He starts messing around with some music. She gives him some feedback, and he throws out this song onto TikTok, and it blows up. And it's a huge hit. They raised money for an EP that they did last year or the year before. And, it kind of just has blown up. And I really love this album. It's fun. It's relatable. It feels authentic and personal. And yeah, it's a fun album to listen to. And I really, really enjoyed it. I think for a while, right after it came out, I was playing it almost daily. I just was really, really connecting with it. I do have a bit of a personal connection to them. They don't know who I am by any means, but I found out after the fact that they have a strong connection to the church I go to. I had no idea. So it was pretty funny. I was actually talking to a pastor of mine, and we were just chit-chatting about music, and he asked me if there's any new bands I'm interested in, and I said, there's this group from Minnesota called Dury that just put out an album. And he's like, they go here, right? And I had no idea. So that was pretty hilarious. They go to a different campus than I go to. But that was pretty hilarious. And, they have a Minnesota connection. So I was looking out for those Minnesota bands. And so this moves into the number 3. Some songs that stand out to me are Coming of Age, Who's Laughing Now, Hasta La Vista Baby, I'm Fine, Little Bit Lonely, Loser Club, and Encore are all absolutely great. I mean, there you go. I listed half the album. Absolutely great album. I like some of the way they play with I want to say iconography. I don't think that's the right phrase. But the yellow that they use all over their branding, they've got a really strong brand too, which I like that about a band. Sometimes it can be kind of fun. So yeah, Dury's Suburban Legend. It's great. Totally go check it out if you haven't. So hot right now. Dury, so hot right now. All right, let's move on to number 2. And I will say out of the gates, this is a 1A. I really struggled with 1 and 2 here. I finally just had to make a decision, and I'm gonna qualify this a little bit, but it's History Books by the Gaslight Anthem.
I know, pardon me forever. But you know, I'm not afraid of going loud. I'll wait around, I'll wait for you now. I built the rooms of this house to stand ground.
So yeah, like I said, this is really 1A. I think this is the best album of the year. It just may have not been my favorite album of the year. A little bit of background for me personally with the Gaslight Anthem. I did not discover them until after 2014, which you might note is when they broke up. It was the last album they put out. Get Hurt came out in 2014. So this was their first album in 9 years. And I did not know of them in 2014. It was after that that I discovered them and kind of connected with all their albums. And this was really my first album that I was an active fan when they were an active band. So that was pretty cool. And, since I discovered them, I've totally fallen in love with them. I think their 3-album run of the 59 Sound, American Slang, and Handwritten, that's as good as any 3-album run. I feel really confident of that. All 3 of those albums are almost perfect in a lot of ways. And I really love their sound. I really love their approach, the way they make you feel nostalgic for things. I clearly have an enjoyment of that. I've talked about that last week with the Menzingers. I like those bands that make you feel a little bit nostalgic for things. And so again, like I said, this was really my first album that they were releasing while I was actively a fan of theirs. So that was super exciting, and I was really, really excited for this. And then when it came out, I didn't actually like it on first listen. I was a little underwhelmed with it. It took a second or third listening, and then it started to come around, but I just did not click with it the first time it came out, or the first time I listened to it. There is this moment where the album starts to click with me. It's in the song It's in the song In Michigan in 1975. And they come to I believe it's the chorus, and it's, "'Cause if I could be free, why would I stay chained? And if that makes you sad, you should be ashamed. And maybe I'm not the one to blame after all. I'm saving up my body for when I'm in love. But if you want me now, you should call me up. 'Cause I'm losing my desire for being alive tonight in Michigan in 1975. And it clicked. It just all clicked. And that's one of the slower songs. I think it's one of the slower songs on side, and I'm saying slower or mellower, chiller songs on side A. And all of a sudden it just kind of clicked with me, because I think that's what I didn't love about it at first, is I wanted more of their punk anthems. And I know that they're not really punk anymore, but I wanted more of that. And I just wasn't getting that out of this album. But then that song really, really clicked with me, and just how beautiful it was. And all of a sudden the whole album just seemed to kind of fall together. And I went back to it over and over and over again. And I really was able to connect with it. And I really loved Brian Fallon is the lead on the Gaslight Anthem. And I loved his album Local Honey. It is great. I think it's only like 9 songs. It's fairly short. They're all super, super mellow, but it is such a beautiful record. And I don't, you can tell this list is mostly kind of punk rock stuff, or punk rock tangential, or ska stuff. And I loved Local Honey. I have it on vinyl. I thought it was so good. I don't know if it was just the original release of this was kind of this weird mix of kind of more chill songs. And I wanted more of those rock songs. And then when those chill songs kind of won me over, all of a sudden it set in how good this album was. So that's kind of my how this album kind of ended up hitting me. And I will say, I do think side A is better than side B. But yeah, it's another great addition to their catalog, in my opinion. And I think it's probably up there with those other 3 albums I mentioned, that probably those 3 are probably still tops, but this is right around there. And like I said at the beginning of talking about this album, I do think this is probably the best album of 2023. I think when I look back on this album, it's this and No Joy by Spanish Love Songs. Probably are the 2 albums I consider the best albums of the year. But again, this is my favorite albums of the year. So that's number 2, History Books by the Gaslight Anthem. All right, drum roll, please. I can't play drums, so no drum roll, I guess. My number 1 album is MXPX, Find a Way Home.
I can't ignore my feelings. I try to sit down. I try to relax. I try to take time. I can't take things back. Trying not to panic on my life. Just can't convince myself or anyone else not to give up.
Look, I loved MXPX in high school, and then I fell off. I did not connect with some of their middle of their career albums. 2018, that self-titled album comes out, and I'm totally back in. That album blew me away, although I did not listen to it till 2020, I think. or 2020, 2020. Good job, me. I didn't listen to it till 2020, and I was blown away by it, and it really did push me to go back and check out a lot of their old albums that I hadn't really connected with. I think I purchased a lot of them because I hadn't even purchased them, and yeah, that album when it came out, I was hooked. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so good, and I think it is something about them. I do think this album and that self-titled album are better than a lot of the stuff they were putting out in the middle of their career. I don't know what it was, if they just something clicked when they kind of they didn't reform, but the Yuri and Tom kind of really got re-engaged in 2018. Something clicked in that album, and I think it's still here. I really, really like this album, and I could not stop listening to it. First listen, I was kind of, okay, that was pretty good. And then I listened to it again, and man, I couldn't stop listening to it. And I really think they've found their groove. They've found who they are and what they're trying to do. They're not writing slow songs. They're not trying to write any ballads. They're just putting out these quick pop punk songs, just rolling through them. I don't know if I have a favorite song out this album. It's actually kind of hard for me to pick. Eight of the 13 songs are kind of, I have flagged as I liked, or I think they're kind of in my favorite section. So it's really hard for me to pick just one song that stands out. The first 4 songs of the album are just stacked. They're all great. Probably the only song on the album that I would maybe cut or consider not having on there is Excuse My French. It's just the one song that really doesn't do much for me. Side A is probably stronger, but yeah, it is, again, probably not the best album of the year, but it was my favorite album of the year. It was the album I went back to over and over and over again. And when I finally kind of sat down and said, what was the album that really captured me, it probably was the Suburban Legend by Dury and this album, Find a Way Home by MXPX. And yeah, but then the history books kind of caught up with it. But I really love this album. I don't have a bad thing to say about it. I know some people didn't love the vocal mix on it as much. That stuff tends, unless it's really, really obvious, I don't tend to hear it. I'm really glad that MXPX has kind of found their spot, found their voice, found what they're doing, because the Teenage Politics is such an important album to me. Life in General is a really important album to me. And I'm glad I'm still listening to them making music. I think that's really, really great. So yeah, those are my top 15. I'll put it out somewhere on Twitter. I'll probably put out my top 15 just for the fun of it. But yeah, number one album for me this year, my favorite album was MXPX's Find a Way Home. I do want to call out just some of my favorite songs from the year. I know I've kind of mentioned a lot of them, but Spanish Love Songs, Pendulum is probably my favorite song of the year. Like You Better is probably number 2 by Jeff Rosenstock. And then I'm going to throw out just some other ones in no particular order. Best Wishes, Warmest Regards by the Abrupters. Healthy Body by Catbite. It's an Operation Ivy cover. Really, really good. Story by King's Kaleidoscope. Maybe I think it's called My Emotions. I talked about it last week. Story might be my favorite. Machete Chop by the Dingies, and Who's Laughing Now by Dury is kind of an overwhelmingly great song. And then Michigan in 1975 by Gaslight Anthem. A number of those songs off the side A of Gaslight Anthem's album could all be on there. I picked that one, but History Books is also really good. I also really liked is it Little Fires? The first song on side B, first track on side B of History Books also is probably one of my favorites. So there you go. And I didn't even list an MXPX one, but again, the whole album just has me going. I get done with it and I just hit repeat and play it again. So there you go. All right. There were a couple other album anniversaries this week. There's only 3 that I'm going to mention, so this will be hopefully pretty quick. I'm already going way long. First is Bad Operation by Bad Operation. I love this album. They're one of the newer ska bands out there. I bought this digitally when it came out, and then when they offered it on CD, it came out, and then when I got into vinyl, I bought it on vinyl. So I really love it. It's a just really, really good mix of, it's kind of one of those new ska bands. Not a lot of horns, so again, if you it feels old, yet it feels new and interesting. I will say, I think the lead singer's name is Darius. His vocals at times are not strong. He's a little flat at times. I've seen some live footage of them, and yeah, it's his vocals are not always great. Really good band. I really enjoy listening to them. Bad Operation, their self-titled debut record, Bad Operation. 2 other things to mention. It's very interesting to me. Michael Knott and Joe Strummer share kind of a weird date in history. Michael Knott's birthday is the day that Joe Strummer passed away. So those are two other things that remembered this week, or this week. I think it was the 22nd is Michael Knott's birthday. So happy birthday to him. I find his discography overwhelming. I've tried to kind of go back because I was, again, late on Michael Knott, and trying to dig through his discography and buy stuff is really tough. It's all over the place. It's hard to find. A lot of it's up on Bandcamp, but it's expensive. So yeah, but Michael Knott celebrates a birthday, and it was also the same day that Joe Strummer passed away in, I believe, 2002. Joe Strummer, one of my heroes for sure, but died on Michael Knott's birthday. So kind of an interesting connection there. All right, that is it for the week of December 18th through the December 24th, 2023. I probably should throw out the year in that. Next week, we will talk about Small Town Poets, Page CXBI, Switchfoot, and PFR, all CCM bands. So again, brought to you by CCM Twitter. Shout out to CCM Twitter. We'll also do a couple of hip-hop oriented albums, one by JR, DJ Official, the 166 Click, and Flame. So 4 potential things that will get mentioned next week are all those kind of hip-hop related ones. Also, Bob Dylan has an album that we'll celebrate next week, and Peg and the Rejected and Dread Pirate Roberts will also get a shout out next week. So speaking of Peg and the Rejected, the music at the beginning and the end of the show is the instrumental version of Sing It Out at Street Level by Peg and the Rejected, which is just members of the Dingees focused on some ska tunes. I said ska very weird there, ska. All right, so check out their music. Check out anything by the Dingees and Peg and the Rejected. Thank you so much for joining me this week. Let me know what you think. What did I get right? What did I get wrong? What do you think of my top 5 albums? I know it's not a lot of CCM, some CCM connections, but it's not really what I'm into. You can tell it's a lot of punk rock. It's a lot of ska. That's really where I'm at with my music right now. So and then, the other album out, Anniversaries from the week. What were your favorites? I know there's not a lot of them. Next week, there's a lot more. It's funny. The week before Christmas, not a lot of releases. The week after, much more. Not much more, but more at least. You can find me on Twitter at Caleb the Spy with no spaces. I'm also on Instagram at Caleb the Spy with underscores. You can email me at calebthespypodcast@gmail.com. No spaces or underscores in that. If there are albums that should be on my calendar because they are worth celebrating, let me know. Reach out to me, whether it's on Twitter or Instagram or over email, and I will try and get them added. Please subscribe and share the podcast. If you're so inclined, leave a rating or review. I've heard that's an effective way to spread the word about podcasts, and I enjoy doing this, so I want more people to hear it. You might have heard, too, I'm actually starting another podcast with a buddy of mine, so I'm going to be working on 2 of them. I hope I can keep up. I want to be able to keep on doing this. Maybe the key to this one is not letting it run 45 minutes and trying to keep it a little shorter. Most of all, I do want to say thank you if you engage with me at all on social media. I've said that I've gotten, so I started saying this. I do put a lot of time into setting up my daily posts and just seeing people get excited to revisit or discover those albums that they'd never even heard of, or, revisit albums that they love and they just haven't listened to in a while. It's always a thrill. I love hearing about it. There's been people who've mentioned that they've gone and checked stuff out because I've posted it, or they listened to it for the first time in years, and that's always a thrill to me. So, thanks for engaging on social media. Again, I put a lot of time and energy into that. So thanks again if you listen to any or all of this show, and have a very Merry Christmas. Depending on when you're listening to this will come out on Sunday, the 24th, I believe. So, have a Merry Christmas. I hope everybody has a good break. I have the week off after Christmas. We're going to start working on that other podcast, hopefully, and hope to talk to you next week. One more show, I believe, before 2024. So thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.